The air inside the colossal wooden beast is thick with the scent of sweat, pine pitch, and terror. Men are packed shoulder to shoulder in the suffocating darkness, their hands gripping sword hilts, their breathing shallow and ragged. Outside, they can hear the sounds of a city celebrating its supposed victory. Drunken songs, laughter, and the shuffling of feet echo through the wooden shell. Each sound is a lifetime, an agonizing weight in the belly of the Trojan horse. For 10 years they have fought outside these walls. Now, their final, most audacious gamble depends on silence and the enemy's ignorance. At stake is more than just the lives of these elite Achaean warriors hidden within the offering. It is the culmination of a decade of bloodshed, of fleets launched and heroes fallen. If they are discovered, they will be butchered, and the Greek army, exhausted and demoralized, will finally break and sail for home in disgrace. The greatest siege in the memory of the world will end not with a bang, but with the pathetic whimper of a failed trick. The fate of Troy, the honor of Agamemnon, and the very concept of heroic glory rests on the strength of a few wooden bolts. At the heart of this impossible plan is one man, not the strongest or the fastest, but the most cunning. Odysseus of Ithaca, the master of strategy, the weaver of tales and deceptions. It was his mind that conceived this madness, his silver tongue that convinced the Greek war council to entrust their fate to a hollow statue. He is in the darkness with his men, his senses alive, listening to the creaks of the wood, the sounds of the city, calculating the precise moment when a decade of war will be decided by the turning of a latch. But is this where the story of Troy truly ends? Was a magnificent Bronze Age metropolis, a city that withstood a 10-year siege by the greatest army ever assembled, truly brought down by a wooden toy? Or is this masterful deception merely the most famous thread in a tapestry of myth so vast and compelling that it has obscured the truth for 3,000 years? Where does the epic poem of Homer end and the gritty, blood-soaked reality of history begin? This is the central mystery of the Trojan War. The latch is thrown. In the dead of night, the belly of the horse opens, spilling its silent, deadly cargo into the unsuspecting heart of Troy. The warriors slip through the sleeping streets, killing the sentries and throwing open the mighty gates. The main Achaean army, which had only pretended to sail away, surges into the city. What follows is not a battle, but a slaughter. Troy burned. The great walls that had stood for generations are finally breached from within, and a civilization is extinguished in a single night of fire and steel. History is not always written by the victors, but its memory is often shaped by the best storytellers. The tale of the Trojan horse is a masterstroke of narrative, a symbol of cunning over brute force that has echoed through millennia. Yet it is this very perfection, this almost theatrical climax, that forces us to pull back the curtain and ask what truly happened on that windswept plain in what is now modern-day Turkey. We must journey back past the myth to the world that inspired it. Our story begins not with a wooden horse, but with a golden apple. At the wedding of a sea nymph, Eris, the goddess of discord, tosses an apple inscribed for the fairest among the goddesses. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all claim it. They choose a mortal, the Trojan prince Paris, to be the judge. He chooses Aphrodite, who had promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. This is the divine spark, the moment of celestial vanity that, according to the legend, will set the mortal world aflame. That woman was Helen, wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. When Paris visits Sparta, he is overcome by her beauty, and with Aphrodite's help, he abducts her and takes her back to Troy. Some versions say she went willingly, a lover escaping a political marriage. Others paint her as a tragic victim. Regardless, her departure is the ultimate offense. It is a violation of hospitality, a theft of property, and a deep, personal insult to a powerful king. The honor of every Greek king is now tied to her return. The protagonist of this first act is not a warrior, but an oath. Years before, Helen's many suitors had all sworn a pact to defend her chosen husband against any who would wrong him. Now Menelaus' brother, the High King Agamemnon, calls upon that oath. He is the commander, the political force who transforms a personal grievance into a grand crusade. His ambition is the engine of the war, gathering the fleets, marshaling the heroes, and launching 1,000 ships to bring back one woman and burn one city to the ground. But could such a war, a 10-year conflict involving tens of thousands of soldiers and the resources of an entire civilization, truly be fought over a single elopement? Is it plausible that the entire Achaean world would grind to a halt and pour its wealth and blood onto the beaches of Troy for the sake of one king's marital honor? Or is the beautiful Helen a metaphor, a poetic stand-in for something far more tangible and far less romantic: economic power, trade routes, and cold, hard geopolitical dominance? The legend, of course, insists on romance and honor. The Achaean fleet lands and the war begins. But it is not a war of grand battles. For 9 long years it is a stalemate. A brutal, grinding affair of raids, skirmishes, and a siege that cannot break the city's impenetrable walls. The Iliad, Homer's epic, doesn't even concern itself with these first 9 years. It opens in the 10th and final year, focusing on a conflict not between Greeks and Trojans, but within the Greek camp itself, a crisis sparked by the rage of a single man. That man is Achilles, the greatest warrior the world has ever known. He is the son of a goddess, a demigod who is swift, deadly, and nearly invincible. But he is also a man of immense pride and fragile ego. When Agamemnon, in an act of supreme arrogance, takes Achilles' war prize, a captive woman named Briseis, Achilles is consumed by a wrath that threatens to destroy the entire Greek war effort. He withdraws from the battle, and his absence is immediately felt as the tide turns in favor of the Trojans. This is the true heart of the Iliad. It is not a story about the Trojan War. It is a story about the devastating consequences of human pride and rage. With Achilles sulking in his tent, the Trojans, led by their own noble champion Hector, drive the Greeks back to their ships. Heroes fall, the Greek defenses crumble, and it seems that Agamemnon's grand army is on the verge of annihilation. The very survival of the expedition now depends on placating the wounded pride of its greatest, but most volatile, asset. For centuries, this epic of warring gods and larger-than-life heroes was considered just that, a story. The foundation of Western literature, yes, but not a history book. Troy was a place in the imagination, like Atlantis or El Dorado. No serious scholar believed in its physical existence. The narrative was too grand, the characters too mythic. How could one even begin to search for a city that was likely nothing more than a poet's invention, a backdrop for a timeless drama about the human condition? The search required a protagonist as obsessed and driven as Achilles himself. His name was Heinrich Schliemann, a 19th century German businessman who had amassed a fortune and possessed a single, all-consuming passion: to prove that Homer's epics were not fiction, but fact. He was not a trained archaeologist. He was a treasure hunter, a romantic, guided by little more than a dog-eared copy of the Iliad and an unshakable belief that the words of the poet were a literal roadmap to a lost world. Schliemann focused his search on a large mound in Turkey known as Hisarlik, a location that seemed to match Homer's geographical descriptions. The academic world scoffed, but Schliemann used his vast personal wealth to begin excavations in 1871. His methods were brutal, more akin to demolition than archaeology. Convinced that Homer's Troy must be at the very bottom of the mound, he blasted a massive trench straight through the center, destroying countless upper layers of settlement in his haste to reach the heroic age. Then in 1873, he found it. Or so he believed. Near the bottom of his trench, he uncovered a spectacular cache of gold and silver jewelry, diadems, cups, and weapons. He immediately declared it Priam's treasure, smuggling it out of the country and famously having his young Greek wife, Sophia, photographed wearing the jewels of Helen. To the world, it seemed he had done the impossible. He had torn a city from the pages of mythology and placed its riches into the hands of the modern world. He had found Troy. But the story of archaeology is rarely so simple. Schliemann's spectacular announcement was soon clouded by doubt. Later analysis revealed a critical error. The layer where he found his treasure, known as Troy II, was dated to about 2500 BC. This was over 1,000 years before the traditional date of the Trojan War in the late Bronze Age. The city he found was not Priam's Troy. In his frantic rush, he had dug right past the actual candidate for the Homeric city, a layer known as Troy VI or Via. Was Schliemann a visionary pioneer or a destructive charlatan? The debate rages to this day. He undeniably located the site that nearly all modern scholars agree is the historical Troy. His passion reignited interest in a period of history that had been lost to myth. Yet his crude methods destroyed irreplaceable evidence, and many suspect that Priam's treasure was not a single find, but a collection of artifacts from various locations that he consolidated to create a more spectacular story. His discovery was monumental but deeply flawed. After Schliemann, more scientific archaeologists took over. Work by figures like Wilhelm Dürpfeld and Karl Blegen carefully peeled back the layers of Hissarlik. They discovered that this was not one city, but at least 9, built one on top of the other over 3 millennia. They identified a particular layer, Troy Via, that showed compelling evidence of a violent end. It was destroyed by fire around 1200 BC, the very time period the Trojan War was said to have occurred. The walls were there. The destruction was real. This was a tantalizing clue, but it wasn't proof of Homer's war. A city can be destroyed for many reasons: an earthquake, an internal fire, an attack by unknown sea peoples. The evidence for a 10-year siege by a pan-Hellenic army was still missing. The smoking gun remained elusive. For decades, the academic consensus settled on a cautious middle ground. There was a place called Troy, and it was destroyed, but the Homeric epic was almost certainly a poetic exaggeration of a much smaller regional conflict. The most electrifying evidence would come not from a trench in Turkey, but from dusty clay tablets found in the archives of a completely different civilization, the Hittites. The Hittite Empire was a major power in the late Bronze Age, a contemporary of both Mycenaean Greece and the city of Troy. In their diplomatic records, cuneiform tablets speak of a troublesome vassal state in western Anatolia, a city they called Wilusa. Linguists were stunned. Wilusa is a near-perfect phonetic match for the early Greek name for Troy, Ilios. The tablets also mention a king of Wilusa named Alexandru. This name is strikingly similar to Alexandros, which was another name for the Trojan prince Paris. The Hittite texts speak of political tensions, treaties, and military conflicts surrounding Wilusa, placing it exactly where Troy stood and confirming it was a significant political player in the region, powerful enough to draw the attention of a great empire. Suddenly, Troy was no longer an isolated city from a Greek poem. It was a real place, locked into the known geopolitical landscape of the late Bronze Age. The Hittite records paint a picture of a strategic city controlling access to the Dardanelles Strait, a vital trade artery between the Black Sea and the Aegean. This provided a powerful, non-mythological motive for war. A coalition of Mycenaean Greek kingdoms might well have launched an expedition to break Troy's stranglehold on lucrative trade routes. So where does this leave our heroes? There is no archaeological or textual evidence for an Agamemnon, an Achilles, or a Hector. These figures are almost certainly the creations of a long tradition of oral poetry. The bards who sang these tales over centuries would have taken the kernel of a real historical event, a trade war, a pirate raid, a dynastic struggle, and embellished it, adding divine interventions and creating heroic archetypes to make the story more compelling for their audience. Consider the character of Achilles. His personal rage is the engine of the Iliad, but his story is pure myth. The invulnerability, the talking horses, the divine parentage, these are the hallmarks of folklore, not history. He represents the ideal warrior ethos, a glorious, violent life that ensures immortal fame, but at the cost of an early death. He is a literary device, a personification of the brutal and tragic nature of war itself, not a man who ever actually walked the earth. The same is true for the gods. In the Iliad, the gods of Olympus are active participants. They choose sides, protect their favorite heroes, and interfere directly on the battlefield. This divine machinery is a fundamental part of the epic, but it has no place in a historical reconstruction. It is the poet's way of explaining the unpredictable nature of fortune in battle, and of elevating the conflict from a mere human squabble to a struggle of cosmic significance. What we are left with is a fascinating hybrid. The stage is real. A fortified, influential Bronze Age city named Wilusa/Troy existed and was likely destroyed in a conflict. The players on the Greek side were also real. The Mycenaean civilization was a maritime power with the military capability to launch overseas expeditions. The motive is plausible, control of strategic trade routes. But the script, the actual narrative of the war with its specific heroes, duels, and 10-year timeline, is the product of poetic genius. Even the scale of the war is likely an exaggeration. Homer speaks of 1,000 ships and over 100,000 soldiers. Archaeology of the Mycenaean world suggests this is a wild overstatement. A more realistic expedition might have involved a few dozen ships and a few thousand warriors. The war was likely not a continuous 10-year siege, but a series of seasonal raids that culminated in the final destruction of the city. The epic telescopes time and inflates numbers for dramatic effect. So we return to the central question. Did the Trojan War happen? The answer is a frustrating but fascinating yes and no. A historical conflict, a Trojan War, almost certainly occurred. But the Trojan War as described by Homer, the epic clash of demigods and kings over a stolen queen, did not. Homer was not a historian trying to record events with factual accuracy. He was the inheritor of centuries of oral tradition, a master poet who crafted the definitive version of a foundational myth for the Greek people. The truth of the Iliad is not a factual truth, but an emotional and psychological one. It explores the universal themes of glory, honor, rage, loss, and the brutal reality that war brings suffering to both victor and vanquished. Hector's tearful farewell to his wife and child is one of the most moving scenes in all of literature precisely because it is so human. It transcends its Bronze Age setting and speaks to the tragedy of all soldiers in all wars. The enduring power of the Troy myth lies in its ability to be both a grand adventure and a profound anti-war statement. We thrill at the prowess of Achilles and the nobility of Hector, but Homer never lets us forget the cost. The beaches are littered with the bodies of young men who will never go home. The poem ends not with the victory of the Greeks, but with the funeral of the Trojan hero Hector, a moment of immense grief and shared humanity. In the end, the search for the historical Troy reveals a deeper truth about how we interact with the past. We crave the certainty of facts, the solid ground of archaeology and textual evidence. But we are also drawn to the power of stories, the grand narratives that give meaning to those facts. The Trojan War lives in that space between, a place where a real, forgotten conflict was transformed by poetry into a myth that has shaped the consciousness of Western civilization. The whispers from Hisarlik and the verses of Homer are two sides of the same incredible story.